The morale of the men going over the Alps was seriously challenged. They're hungry, they're wet, increasingly cold, they're dispirited. Hannibal is suffering alongside them. Just like Alexander the Great in the mountains of Afghanistan, Hannibal suffers with his men.
It wasn't just the physical hardship and treacherous terrain that the Carthaginians had to deal with.
Certain parts of the route, the valleys are very narrow, the passes are very vulnerable, and the local tribes weren't exactly friendly. Panic could be created in the Carthaginian army, strung out through the passes by such attacks. There's at least one incident where there were major losses in the baggage train as animals panicked and plunged into a deep river gorge.
It took Hannibal 15 days to cross the Alps. More than 30,000 of his troops and many of his elephants perished on the journey. Bodies littered the Alpine paths all the way back to France, but they had made it. They had reached Italy. The Romans were incredulous. They couldn't believe what Hannibal was up to.
The Romans probably thought of Hannibal as an adventurer, a chancer, someone who was perhaps gambling Carthaginian power recklessly, someone who had forced the Romans to fight, and he was about to get smashed.
The two sides clashed in northern Italy, first on the plains of the Ticino River and then on the banks of the Trebia River. Both times, the Romans were soundly defeated. Hannibal was hungry for more strikes on the Romans. Victories furthered his cause, winning new allies and pushing him further and further towards his hated enemy. He goaded Rome by plundering his way through the Italian countryside, knowing full well the impact this would have. At this point, the Romans would have been wise to await reinforcements. They had already suffered unexpected losses at the hands of Hannibal, but the sight of the Carthaginians terrorizing their allies was too much. The Roman army was about to walk straight into one of Hannibal's legendary traps. The 30-year-old Carthaginian leader chose a lake in central Italy for his next clash with the Romans. It was perfect geography for what he had in mind.
Hannibal is ahead of the Romans. He finds a place where his road runs along the side of a lake with mountains rising up all the way round and almost blocking off the road. Narrow entry to the lakeside, a narrow exit from this particular place. And Hannibal places his men on the mountains, which will be above the mist, and he blocks the exit to the valley, and he places another unit to block the entrance once the Romans have entered this killing field.
The Romans marched straight into Hannibal's trap and were completely unprepared for the ambush that came from the mountains above them.
For the Romans, it would have been very chaotic, it would have been very, very frightening. You have evidence of Roman troops literally going and drowning in the lake rather than facing up to the Carthaginians.
When the mist lifted, the full horror of the scene was revealed. 15,000 Romans were dead, and the Carthaginians were moving slowly among the bloody bodies, stripping them of weapons and armor. Hannibal's tactics had triumphed once again.
He was an imaginative commander. Many military commanders are sound rather than imaginative, but Hannibal was imaginative. He thought his way out of problems.
So far, Hannibal had outwitted his enemy, but a new challenge came in the form of Quintus Fabius Maximus, a gifted Roman leader.
Fabius decided that the best strategy for the Romans in confronting Hannibal was not to face him directly, but to try and bottle him up, to make it difficult to supply his army, to squeeze him gradually until Hannibal was squeezed out of Italy.
Rome followed Fabius's plan. and thought they finally had Hannibal just where they wanted him. But the Carthaginian general was about to spring his biggest surprise yet. Hannibal and his men had been plundering their way through Italy, undefeated, for nearly a year. They continued to burn villages and murder Roman officials in the hope of goading Rome into further conflict. But the Romans were biding their time. They were not about to suffer more humiliating defeats. Instead, they shadowed Hannibal and his men, looking for the right opportunity to attack. After months of cat-and-mouse maneuvers, the Romans finally thought they had Hannibal trapped in the floor of a deep valley cut off by a river in southern Italy. Surely, there was no way the Carthaginian could extract himself from this situation.
The Romans are up above, it's night time, and they suddenly see this great horde of lights surging up the hillside. Hannibal's getting away. Got to be stopped. So the Romans converge on where the lights are. Only to find a great herd of cattle with burning torches attached to their horns.
In the cover of night, Hannibal's men had tied burning sticks to a herd of oxen and sent them, horns of flame, towards Fabius's army.
And at the same time, Hannibal and his army silently crept out of the valley by one of the unguarded exits, and they're away.
In Rome, there was deep concern. What was to be done about Hannibal Barca? Hannibal ad portus. This is a Latin saying that the Romans have often used. It means Hannibal is at the door. The fear of Hannibal became so great that it was said Roman parents would use it as a way to threaten their misbehaving children. If a child was bad, the parent would say that Hannibal was coming for them. This was the effect of Hannibal on the people of Rome. Rome's strategy of not confronting Hannibal had failed, and the Senate now prepared for all-out war on a scale never seen before. 90,000 men were called up to do battle. Hannibal was now facing the full might of Rome.
They've got this absolutely massive army, much bigger than Hannibal's. They've got confident commanders who have the backing of the Roman Senate to go and beat up Hannibal. And they appear to have got him where they want him, open ground, where the Romans can deploy and outmaneuver, outflank Hannibal. So they are going to win.
Yet again, Rome had underestimated Hannibal. The battle that was to follow has become a classic of its kind, a supreme example of a military genius at work, the perfectly fought battle, studied today at military academies all over the world.